Well, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us on our session 10 of the Refocus and Rebuild webinar series. Our focus is helping Virginia businesses reopen in a post-COVID-19 world. My name is Sandy Ratliff. I'm with Virginia Community Capital, and if you're not familiar with us, we are a community development financial institution in Virginia focused on lending, investing, and community innovation services. I'm happy to be a partner in this program with the Virginia Small Business Development Center Network, Gen Edge, UVA's College at Wise Office of Economic Development, and the Southwest Virginia Alliance for Manufacturing. It's hard to believe that we're already on 10 out of the 13 weeks, and I hope you'll continue to join us all through the end of this program. You'll probably notice when you've received a reminder email from me, there is a link on there to access a variety of templates and guidebooks to help you develop a resiliency plan. We designed this program in helping businesses should another pandemic or crisis happen. You are going to be better prepared, and that's why we've developed this series the way we have. Now, before we get started and I introduce our speaker today, we want to keep this webinar within a 1 hour time frame, and to keep it flowing, we have muted everyone. However, we do want to hear from you, so we ask that if you have a question for our presenter, if you will post those in the Q&A section, we will address those at the end of the presentations. I am delighted to have one of our favorite presenters back today to lead and talk about key resources, customer contact, critical information storage options in this session. Sam Wolford with Gen Edge is a strong supporter of businesses in Virginia. I have known Sam for many, many years, and I know that he is passionate about helping Virginia businesses grow and connect to resources. So Sam, thanks for leading today's session, and I will turn the program over to you.
Thank you, Sandy, and I do thank all of those organizations that have been participating in these webinars. Hopefully it is bringing value to our business community across the state. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with my presentation today. Today I'm going to be talking about key resources, customer and critical information, technology, storage options, and backups, and all of these as they relate to business continuity and business resiliency planning. If you've been tuning into these webinars, then you know that there is a significant need as business leaders, as business owners, to have business continuity or business resiliency plan in place for specific incidents that can occur, that can actually create challenges for your business. It was said that preparedness is the only way we can combat a natural disaster. And John Quinlan is someone who said that, but I say any disaster, whether it is natural or whether it's man-made. If you have someone in your business who takes key intellectual properties and shares them with a competitor, that can be a huge disaster to you. So any disaster. So being prepared is the way to combat that. And it's very hard to be prepared for everything that could possibly happen. And we certainly see that with this COVID-19 challenge that we've been dealing with, as well as our response to it. Who would have thought that we would have businesses across our nation that would still be closed today, still not open today because of the shutdown. Sorry about that. So we're going to start out by talking about key resources, and they do fall into several different categories. They're both internal and external to your business. They can be people, facilities, systems, emergency response systems, whether it's emergency response crews or whether it's actual fire and rescue departments, equipment, materials, supplies, funding, support expertise, transportation, logistics, information. All of those are important aspects of the key resources that you're going to want to identify as a part of your business continuity and business resiliency plan. But how do you come up with, okay, what are the resources that we need? And one of the things that you need to consider doing is making sure that you do an assessment. an upfront assessment as to what those resources need to be as a part of your overall business continuity planning, business resiliency planning, crisis response planning. Key resources are a critical factor in all of those things. You need to make sure that you put together an assessment that takes into account as many possible types of disasters, types of events that you possibly can think of. You know, it could be something as simple as a fire on one of your production lines, or a fire in your kitchen, or it could be something as serious as you needing to evacuate your facility or go to an alternative method to serve your customers. For example, what a lot of our restaurants did in the process of this COVID-19, moving to a carry-out and delivery services. Those are things that you need to kind of think about as you go through and start looking at, okay, what are some of the resources that we may need? So let's talk a little bit about the assessment and assessment program goals. There are some things that you may want to focus on as a part of your assessment. One key factor in most every situation is safety. Obviously, whenever you assess your resources or assess for your resources, you're going to want to take into account, okay, are there specific safety resources that I need to be looking at and thinking about in relationship to all the various disasters and various challenges that we face? You're going to want to be thinking about, okay, how can I serve my customers and make sure I minimize the disruptions that my customers experience? Because your customers, obviously, they are a critical resource as well, and we'll talk more about that later. But, without them, you don't have a business. So you've got to work to try to think about, as you're assessing, how do I minimize my disruptions? How do I protect my facilities? If it's a natural disaster, a hurricane, for example, are there things that you can do, whether it's sandbagging or whether it's putting the plywood up over your windows, or all the different things that can be done to prepare for a hurricane? What can I do, and what may I need as a resource in order to protect my facility? Also, preventing environmental impacts. Obviously, a lot of huge environmental impacts come in the midst of disasters, and some of them are disasters in and of themselves. You have a major spill at an oil refinery that's going to have long-term environmental impacts, and working and looking at the resources that are required to help prevent some of those environmental impacts needs to be a part of your assessment. And ultimately, you've got to try to protect your brand and your reputation. Those are a critical part of your business. People won't come to you if they don't believe in you. They won't buy from you if they don't like what you offer, and if you can't consistently offer it at the same level. So you need to be looking at, okay, what are some of the resources that I can put in place? What are some of the resources I may need to deal with and make sure that I have my brand and my reputation protected? So with these assessment program goals, you may very well have some performance objectives. Some of the things that you'll need to think about. Do I have employees that are trained, that I can use as resources? And if I don't, do I need to put something in place to identify the employees that would fit in those areas if they already have training, or to get people trained? What about your emergency response plan? Do you consider that plan itself part of your resources? It really is. And whenever you look at all the different types of emergencies that can happen, making sure that you have that plan in place can be a critical objective of your resource planning as a part of your business continuity plan as a whole. What about customer service? Do you have a plan in place to maintain the level of customer service that your customers are going to require as you go through whatever disaster, whatever situation, whatever crisis it is that you deal with? Are you going to have those things in place? What about your technology? It was interesting. I was talking with a company actually a couple of months ago, and their entire computer system went down. Their entire computer system went down for an extended period of time. They had to reload everything that they had. Whenever you're looking at your key resources, do you have the resources in place where you can quickly recover if you have a technology issue? These folks, they had to completely reload from laptops to all of their servers to even their equipment computers, equipment control computers. They had to reload everything. And it literally took well over a week for them to do that. So they lost a lot of productive time in doing that. So thinking about, okay, what resources can we put in place? What are the key resources we can put in place to recover from those technology challenges needs to be an objective of your assessment process. What about your production response? If you are a manufacturer and you have multiple production lines, probably the 80-20 rule is true for you, where 80% of your profits come from about 20% of your products. And if that's the case, do you have a backup for those 80% of your products that you produce? Have you thought about what resources you may need to make sure you're able to maintain that critical level of your most demanded products? And, are there things that you need to be thinking about as you go through and you develop your key resources list for your business continuity plan? So there's a few questions that you really need to be thinking about and asking about resources whenever you do your resource needs assessment. It's really fairly easy to think, oh well, I've got this. I don't need to worry about it. I can do this. This is easy, and it really is. There's a lot of common sense to it, but you got to make sure you ask all the questions. And I'm not saying these are all the questions. There may be questions that are specific to your business that are a little bit different. It does require a lot of thoughtfulness, a lot of time put in to think about what it is that you do. So the questions that you need to be thinking about, what's the quantity of the resource? You may identify a resource, but how much of it do I need? How many contractors do I need to help get my facility back up to where it's functional and operational? How many new computers may I need to put in place if my computer system gets damaged somehow? What is the quantity of the resources that you may need for an average disaster? When will the resource be needed? How quickly do you think you're going to need it? You're going to want to get back and up and operational immediately, as quick as you possibly can. So how quick do you need it? And do you have a location where you can get or access that resource? So when will that resource be needed? What capability does the resource need to have? Does it need, are there bare minimum capabilities that you can get by with that may be options for a backup? Or are there, very specific, very detailed requirements that, really you're going to have that exact same setup back in place? And what are the limitations? What are the limitations to that setup? What are the limitations to you being able to get it back up and in place, get those resources in place as quickly as possible? And what's the cost? What is the cost of procuring the resources that you need, to make sure are available to replace or to get things back up and operational? And are there liabilities associated with the use of those resources? Is it someone or something that's not under your control but under someone else's control that you may be held responsible for? Those are all questions that you need to be asking, and there's many, many more, and they are sometimes very specific to your company and to your business and the way that you do business. So as I mentioned, the key resources, they do fall into several categories. So we're going to go through and we're going to look at some of these categories specifically and talk a little bit about each one. Let's talk about the people. There's different people that will be a part of your, that will be a part of your resources you're going to need to be looking at. your employees. That's a key available resource that you have access to and that you really want to be thinking about as a potential part of the resources for your recovery. But have you made sure that they're trained? Have you made sure that they can fill the roles that you need them to fill? Are there people who can do multiple jobs and fill multiple functions? And do you have them identified as specific resources under specific categories? Excuse me. Some companies, they may choose to put together teams of people specifically for crisis management, for disaster response and recovery. And when they do those things, are you going through, if you're doing that, are you identifying training gaps, opportunities to make sure that key resource is ready and is able to do what you need them to do? Some companies do look at developing emergency response teams. Again, how do you make sure that you have the right people on that emergency response team? And does it necessarily have to be people from within your business? Could it potentially be, a contractor, someone else that can come in and actually help you deal with whatever crisis or whatever disaster you're dealing with? So emergency response teams, those individuals may very well be important. Excuse me. Important parts of your key resources. What about your continuity and resilience team? Do you count them as key parts of your resources? You need to make sure that they are counted that way, and that the crisis management team is being looked at as a part of your key resources. Really, people are your most valuable key resource, and helping as many people as you possibly can within your company, within your organization, to be a part of the response and recovery from a crisis or from a disaster. It really can help those individuals feel like they're a part of something bigger. Help them to realize that, they are contributing not only in the way that they do in their normal everyday job, but that they are a part of the overall importance of keeping the business up and keeping the business running. So including key personnel that, may have specific talents, and identifying those are very, very key resources. If you have a single individual who's trained, only one person who's trained on a specific piece of equipment or on doing a specific process or implementing a specific process, that could be a challenge for you. Do you have others identified in case something were to happen to that individual, either during a crisis or during a disaster, or if something were to happen to them, would that create a crisis for you, a disaster for you? Having people cross-trained is very important when it comes to dealing with the challenges associated with disasters, and making sure that you identify them as a part of those resources, those individuals who may be cross-trained as a part of those key resources is very important. So what about facilities? How do you see your facilities? Do you see your facilities as a key resource? We talked about in past presentations and webinars, we talked about having a emergency operations center for a disaster, for a crisis, for a situation. Do you see your facility having those types of spaces that could be identified as that? Do you have additional storage space? As we go on through, we're going to talk a little bit about some materials and supplies, and you may see, if you have space that's not being utilized in your facility, that may be a key resource to facilitate another key resource. What happens if you can't use your facility, if you have to go someplace else? Is there a way for you to identify other facilities that maybe you could utilize to do your business in, or to stand your business back up? sometimes when floods happen, it can create long-term uh, damage that it takes a long time to recover from. Do you have backup options? And do you see all the spaces that maybe you have access to, all the spaces around you? Do you see those facilities as potential resources? And how can you identify within those spaces what areas could be best to serve the purposes for recovering and dealing with the crisis, recovering from and dealing with the crisis? For example, if you're going to set up an emergency operations center, do you have the phone lines available within that space to deal with the crisis? If you don't, that may be a resource, and we'll talk a little bit about the needs within the facility to to make sure those types of resources are available as well. Telephone lines, internet communication, access to restroom facilities, those types of things that we don't really think of every day, but that really are critical resources whenever we're dealing with the challenges that we face with disasters and with crises. What about your systems? Your computer systems, obviously, and I touched on that a little bit earlier. Computer systems are critical to many business operations today. Do you see those systems as resources? Do you see them and have them on your list of key resources in order to recover from, in order to respond to, in order to deal with a crisis? Most companies who rely heavily on their computer systems, they've been thinking about backups. They've been thinking about, how to make sure there's a way to get their stuff back up and running. But do you look at those systems themselves as a way to potentially, for example, if you lose communications, is that system able to allow you to have some type of, whether it's texting or chatting or internal communication, that you may not think of firsthand? You may think, okay, I'm going to grab my cell phone, but all of a sudden the cell service isn't available. Maybe your computer system is able to do that. Look at all of the systems that you have and see, is there a way for us to utilize this as a resource? Other types of systems, your control systems for your manufacturing processes, if you're a manufacturer, the warning systems that are available for fires and for things that are actually happening within your facility. Some of the detection systems that help you catch disasters before they happen. All of those are key resources that need to be in the front of your mind whenever you're looking at and developing your business opportunity, your business continuity plan, your business resiliency plan, your communication system. That you really can't overemphasize communication. That's the way we survive. And what happens if you lose your phone, or the ability for your phone system to work either with outside or even internally? Do you have other options? Do you have other things that you can put in place that will deal with that? Do you have handheld radios, perhaps? What about using cell phones? If your main phone system goes down, it may be that you can utilize your cell phones. But if you don't see that as a resource, a lot of times we'll overlook some of those things. And if we actually have it written into our business continuity plan, then those systems will be able to be utilized whenever the time and the need arises. Do you have spares for some of your critical computer system components or your computer systems components, whether it's your warning systems or whether it's your communication systems? Do you have spares or backups? I learned a long time ago in dealing with computer systems, if there's a chance that it could fail, it will fail at some point. What are the most critical components? Make sure that you have spares and redundancy built into your systems. All of these are critical resources that should be included and must be included in your business continuity plan. What about emergency response? I mentioned some businesses do develop their own emergency response teams. I've known of businesses that have had internal fire departments where they could respond to an emergency within the facility and get to it and get it taken care of and put out. A lot of businesses don't have that, don't have access to that, don't have the ability to do that. But do you have the information that you need available to get a quick emergency response? Everybody says, well, that's 911. And yes, it is, but it may be more than just 911. You got to make sure that when you look at the emergency response and you look at the key resources that you're going to need, what does that mean specifically for your business? Is there a chance for that fire that started back in the warehouse to spread into an area where you're storing chemicals that could be hazardous or that could be a major problem? And if it is, what are you doing to try to make sure that you have the resources in place to deal with that? What about your emergency medical services? Do you have first aid people on site? Do you have people that can do and handle CPR and utilize the AED, automatic electronic defibrillators? Do you have people that are trained to do that? How far away is your rescue squad from your facility, from your business? Is it a long ways away? Is it going to take a long time for them to get there? Or is it something that is going to be, right there as soon as you call? If it's going to take a while, you probably want somebody in place to deal with that and help within your business. And that's a resource that you probably need to list within your business continuity plan. Things like law enforcement, public health, public works. What about contractors and vendors? Some companies rely on contractors to respond to maybe hazardous spills or to situations within their business. Maybe facility repair, restoration. Do you have those contractors' information, and are you able to get to it quickly? That's part of a key resource that needs to be a part of your business continuity plan. What about your partnerships? Do you have, with some of the businesses or some of the contractors that you have, do you have agreements in place where you can help one another? Where maybe you can provide something for them and they can provide something for you, or you at least have it listed what is needed and how quickly you can get those resources to respond. All of those things need to be included. We talked a little bit about equipment already, but there are some pretty important things to consider as far as your equipment goes. For some manufacturers, for restaurants, for a number of different businesses and industries, equipment can make or break you. So that resource is absolutely critical to your business and your ability to get your business back up and running. Do you have all of an inventory? Do you know what it takes to program it or reprogram it? Do you know how to get a hold of those individuals who can help get that equipment back up, whether it's a contractor or whether it's somebody else that can help you with that? As we talked about the technologies, and we'll get a little bit more into technology in a little bit, having those folks on speed dial, building those relationships, making sure they're a part of your key resources can absolutely be critical to you being able to recover. And making sure all of that is included as a part of your key resources list is critical. What about materials and supplies? I know that the supplies, and I put toilet paper on here for a purpose. Who would have thought that whenever all this started, that toilet paper would be in short supply? I certainly wouldn't have. But it became in very short supply. And, those are critical materials and supplies, for you to operate your business. Have you thought about that? Have you thought about how to make sure those resources that are critical to the operation of your business, both in your manufacturing process and in whatever it is that you offer to your customer, both there as well as the operational side of it. The cleaning supplies, the protective, personal protective equipment, the different things that are required. Do you have those things listed and noted as key resources? You need to make sure that those are listed and noted as key resources. But one of the key resources that's needed whenever the disaster occurs is you've got to have what's needed for your emergency response, for your business continuity, for continuing to move forward, and keeping those teams moving, keeping those teams fed, making sure there's food and there's water and there's other things available for teams that may be working, depending on your business, they may be working, 24 hours a day for a while. You just don't know. It depends upon the disaster. So making sure that you have the food and the water, the basic provisions that are needed, the systems in place to deal with and for them to utilize to make sure that all of the resources you need are in place. What about backup electricity, those types of things? Those are things that you need to be thinking about, things that may have a big impact. And those utilities and utility companies, being able to connect with them are critically important. What about funding? Does anyone ever look at funding money as a resource? And that really is a huge key resource. I know a number of the businesses that I've worked with through this challenge, this COVID-19 challenge, and the response that we had to it. A number of them, thankfully, had cash reserves, and they had to tap into those cash reserves in order to survive, in order to continue to do business, in order to keep their people employed. Funding is a key, and do you look at that funding as a resource? And do you look at funding your business continuity plan, your disaster recovery plan, as a critical resource for your business? What you invest in a preparedness program and making sure that you have in place what you need, it can really pay big dividends if an event occurs. It can really save your business if you really want to break it down and look at it. What are some of the benefits of quickly being able to get back up and running? I know this. I know that when that business was down for a week trying to get their computer systems back up and back going, they lost opportunity. They lost business. That's business that they'll not get back. Doesn't mean that those customers won't come back. It means that business for those days was gone. It wasn't productive. It didn't turn into profit and those types of things for the business. So that funding actually can help offset some of those types of damages. If you have a fire and you're able to quickly recover and get back up and going, that can really be, worthwhile. So what if you don't have the cash reserves? Do you have in place resources for a credit line? Do you have a way to access lending entities that can help you? Those are critically important as well through these types of times. And I know that a number of companies have worked through and utilized the PPP program. And there's a lot of lenders, including Virginia Community Capital, for example, that worked with those companies to help them make sure that they had the funding they needed to keep their people on board. So funding needs to be one of those critical resources and key resources. About your support expertise, where do you go? Getting business continuity planning, getting business resiliency planning, disaster recovery planning, getting all those things in place. Sometimes they may be outside of your expertise, and there are resources that are available that can actually help you. But it may require expertise from outside, dealing with certain hazardous situations within your company. That may require some resources from outside. So do you have all of the support expertise that you may need? Have you sat down and really thought through? And I think that's the key, sitting down and really thinking through as you develop your business continuity plan. Okay, what type of outside support may we need? And it doesn't necessarily mean that you will need it, but may you need. And if you have it and you have it in place, or at least a contact for it in place, then you can always go to that. And so you need to consider support expertise as a key resource, critical resource for your business in the continuity planning. What about transportation and logistics? A lot of companies, you really don't think about things like this, COVID-19, creating such transportation and logistics issues. But there were a tremendous number of transportation and logistics issues that were created as we went through this crisis. And from companies not wanting their drivers to take products into hot spots, to not being able to get supplies from overseas markets because of what was happening. Do you have backups for your transportation and logistics? Have you thought about that as a key resource for your business? If you do transportation yourself, have you thought about, okay, what happens if roadways shut down? What happens if we're not able to get there on a plane? We need to be able to drive. Do I have the resources in place? Those are some key resources you really need to be thinking about whenever you're looking at and dealing with your business continuity plan. What about information? Everybody talks about information technologies, and we use that word, information technologies, pretty broadly. But information really is available in a lot of places. Whether it's available online, that's one place. But you may very well have information, books that you have that explain, how to set up your equipment, how to do other things. Those are resources for your business. And if something happens that you have to shut things down and you have to move equipment or you have to do something differently, having that information in one place is a key resource. The data, the information that you have from your sales, the information that you have from customer contacts to your suppliers, and what about backup suppliers, and all of that information is a critical resource. And having that listed out in your business continuity plan should be a priority. So let's talk a little bit more about customers and the critical information. What do you have as far as your customers' information? Do you have contact numbers, emergency contact numbers where you can reach them if something happens and you're not able to get a delivery to them? I'm sure that you do. But what about in a disaster? When they are trying to respond to that disaster too? And I saw a good bit of this in dealing with some of the supply chain challenges that some of the businesses that I work with have encountered. Some states have been shut down for months. If you don't have in place, a way to let customers know if you have to shut down, or a way to communicate with your customers, if you're not communicating with your customers regularly throughout the process, then they're not going to know when you're ready, when you're back up and going, and they may look someplace else. So you need to look at your customers as a critical resource, and you need to make sure you have all the potential information that you may need about them. A lot of times when we're dealing with, especially like people purchasing things online, we don't get a lot of detail about those customers. But we need to be thinking about that. Okay, how do I get information back to those customers, if something were to happen? And even though they may be online customers, do I have a way to get information back to them? Do I have emails? Do I have email addresses? And when I communicate with them through these types of situations, am I doing it in a way that is really focused on what those customers need, or am I doing it in a way that's focused on me selling? Because that may make a difference as to whether they respond to you. If they understand and they know that you're really concerned with what their needs are and meeting what their needs are, then obviously they're going to be more apt to respond than if they're thinking that you're reaching out to them in order to just try to sell something. And if they get that sense, especially when they're dealing with a disaster like this, a lot of times they'll back off, and they may remember that later on. You know, who and how do you send emails to your customers? You know, are they coming from customer service, or are they coming from an individual specifically that they know? And in a disaster situation, you may want to make sure it's an individual that they know. Or you may want to make it a little more personal and try to connect and create that relationship that you need to maintain it. Look at them as a critical resource for your business, and make sure they're written into your business continuity plan and you've thought about how to deal with them whenever you go through disasters and crises. Other critical information. Do you have the state, local government resources information readily available to you? You know, there's a lot of different resources available. A lot of companies aren't familiar with them. A lot of businesses aren't familiar with them. But if you go through and you experience a federally declared disaster, and I've actually experienced a few of those, you realize the availability of your resources is just absolutely amazing. In fact, it's somewhat overwhelming. You know, there's on FEMA's website, there's over 436 different resources that you can request from FEMA, or that state and local governments can request from FEMA. But you have to understand the process. You know, typically, you know, businesses don't go directly to FEMA. They wind up going through local government to create the initial contact. You know, especially whenever there's FEMA setting up their disaster recovery centers. All of that kind of flows, and there's a design to it. Making sure you know who your local government resources are for emergency management, for emergency response and recovery. That's a critical part of the information you need to have in your business continuity plan. Making sure that you know who to call. And I'm sure most of you already know who to call if you have a problem with your water, if you have a problem with your sewer. If you have a problem with utilities, you know, well, these are the calls that I need to make. But once the disaster is declared, sometimes that changes. And sometimes things wind up getting prioritized. You know, they'll be focused in specific areas. You know, it may be that you know, power restoration isn't necessarily managed specifically by the power companies. They do the restoration, they do the work, but a lot of times that may be prioritized by, you know, some of the other things that are happening. For example, if you have a hospital, even though they have generators and backup power sources, if a hospital is without power, they're going to become the priority. So if you've lost power and they've lost power, then theirs is going to get restored first. Understanding how all that works is important, and making sure that you make that and consider that as you go through and develop your business continuity plan is an important part of that. You know, make sure you know who your Virginia Department of Emergency Management representative is in your region, your local emergency management representatives. What about Department of Health or your local health department folks? Making sure you know who they are, and I'm sure that you know you've looked for that and found that now because of some of the reporting requirements associated with COVID-19. But you need to make sure that's a permanent part of your business continuity plan. What about the small business development centers? You know, they're a partner in this with us, and they have been a huge resource for our businesses through some of these challenging times. They're there to help. Make sure you have their contact information. Make sure that they're listed in your business continuity plan as a key resource. What about, you know, Department of Social Services? You know, you are a part of a community. Your business is a part of a community. You know, there may be some needs that you become aware of that you may become a key link in trying to help others within your community. So as you think through your business continuity plan, you know, think beyond just what's happening today in your business, but think about, you know, what happens to a community whenever that disasters and crises occur, especially the ones that are larger and they require the type of response that the Federal Emergency Management Agency could bring. So think about all of that critical information that you need to get addressed in the business continuity plan. Other critical information. Do you have a list of the inventories that you currently have in your business? A lot of times, if you have to evacuate, your facilities are left kind of open. And I say open, they may be locked down, but if a storm comes through and it's knocking windows out and those types of things, it's open. And, you may not get in quickly. And, having a list of those inventories and being able to report any losses or damages and those types of things, that's critical and important information. What about your production supplies list? Most companies, they know exactly what it takes to produce their products. But do you have that actually literally listed out where it's not just one person who's the purchaser that says, oh, okay, we need to order this week? Do you have it listed out where, if that individual wasn't available, if something were to happen, that you actually can go to that list and say, okay, we're going to need these supplies in order to get back up and operational, get back to producing. And your operational supplies, as I mentioned before, those operational supplies, they can be things, from as simple as the PPE to, as complicated and as challenging as, computer systems, computer supplies, backups, those types of things. What about your employee and immediate family contacts? Those are critical information you need to have. Company operational records, how you operate and how you've been operating and functioning. All of those are important things. Your human resources records. What about the training that you have for your individuals? Do you know who can do what? If something were to happen and you needed to shift things around without having to ask, do you know who has the ability to pick up some slack and really help in your business whenever you're going through some of these challenges? What about other important company information? I'm sure that your company has a lot that is specific to your company. Think about it. As you go through and you develop your business continuity plan, think about the critical information that your business has and make sure that you have that documented as a part of that business continuity plan. So what about technology, storage options, and backups? A lot of people, they think about the technologies, and we talked a little bit about detection systems, warning systems, alarm systems, suppression systems, but even things like pollution control systems, your communication systems, your operational control systems, your computer network and the systems associated with it. Those are all, critical aspects of your business continuity. You need to make sure that you involve the individuals that understand and know the technologies in your planning process and in what you're doing and in the way that you are developing your business continuity plan. And as you can see, detection systems, those may not be the computer and the computer networks. Those may be a totally different type system, maybe a fire detection system. And it may not be connected in with your computer and computer system. So you need to really think through, okay, who does what? And, how can we make sure that this technology and all the technologies that we utilize are included in that business continuity plan and that we're really thinking about making sure that that's a part of it. In thinking in those terms, what about your storage, your data storage? That is a critical aspect of almost every single business today. How are you storing your data? Is your data stored in the cloud? Many companies have gone to cloud-based storage as an option to help deal with and focus on making sure that they have it. Others, their backups and things like that may be a hard disk or external hard drive. But what happens if you don't have access to the internet? Do you have that data also stored on site? That's something to be thinking about. If it's critical data, you may need to have the ability to store some of that data on site. What about physical storage? Most people think, oh, well, it's a disaster. I don't really need that. But in relationship to a disaster, in relationship to a crisis, uh, you may very well want to have some stockpiles of things like, you know, plywood to help board up your building, a little bit of stockpile of maybe toilet paper, for example, a material you need, or maybe some of the supplies that you need in order to continue operation. So do you have a way to have some physical storage space that you can access? And you know, it may be that you'll have to hold inventory at a business that they did. They worked out a deal with another business and that one of their customers, and they agreed that they would store the products. The company agreed they would buy the products within a certain time frame if the company could store them on their site rather than shipping them to them. And so they were able to do that because they did have some storage space on site. But that's something to be thinking about as an option. You know, maybe your customer's demand for your product is not today, but they may know very well that they're going to need it eventually, and they may be willing to work out a deal where you hold on to it. You go ahead and produce it, you hold on to it, and they make some guarantees for purchasing in the future. So physical storage is another one of those things that you need to be thinking about and considering as a part of your business continuity planning. Backups, data, computer system, your equipment. Do you have information backups, information system backups, data backups? Do you have it on a hard drive? If you have it on a hard drive, do you have it in another location? Do you have it in the cloud? Those are some critical aspects, things that need to be thought through. What about your computer systems? Do you have backup components to those computer systems? You know, maybe additional network devices, maybe some additional, you know, hard drives or backed up systems elsewhere that you can move to. Those are all things you need to be thinking about as a part of that planning. What about your equipment? Do you have access to backup equipment? Or if you don't have access to backup equipment, is there options for you to potentially contract with someone else who could do the same work that you do? They don't have the customer, but they may be able to provide you with the product to pass on if your equipment is not available, if your equipment's been damaged or destroyed. Labor force. You know, a lot of us never would have thought about labor force as you know, needing to make sure we have a backup for that. But as we've gone through and we dealt with this COVID-19, we've seen where, you know, if someone comes down with it, then anyone who's had contact with them, you know, they need to go home and quarantine for 14 days. That creates a huge gap. Have you thought about a backup in that labor force for those particular type of situations? Backup facility or production sites and lines, supplies and sources, logistics. We've talked about all these, physical storage. All of these are backups that we need to be thinking about as a part of our business continuity planning and as a part of what we're trying to accomplish in making sure our businesses are resilient long term. So, you know, we've talked about a lot of things today, but success really does occur when opportunity meets preparation. And, you know, being prepared, putting together, having a business continuity plan, making sure that you're thinking through all the things that can happen, accessing the resources that are available to help you. Those are all things that we can do to make sure that our businesses have success when those opportunities come, and that we're prepared whenever we face disasters and crises. So with that, I'm finished. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them.
Thanks, Sam. Another great job. We do have a question, and I've got several questions for you. If you're ready, hang on.
Okay.
Okay. Here's a question from one of our viewers. I'm starting a small medical clinic, and I'm hiring an outside individual to set up and oversee my system. The point Sam made regarding IT information losses for which someone else controls, yet for which I am responsible, is pertinent. Are there any specific computer technology questions I need to ask beforehand? Of course, I can simply ask a very broad, is my system backed up, to which the IT guy can state, oh, yes, for sure. But are there more IT buzzword specific, deeper questions that he should ask? I wonder if Sam has encountered unfortunate business solutions where the owner says, I was told that the system was backed up, yet there was a giant yes, but issue that was never unpacked, addressed that could even been helpful.
Well, I have experienced situations like that, and one thing that I would suggest that you do with your technology provider, um, not only ask them if it's backed up, but ask them to show you how the backup is done and then how it's restored. So in other words, have them do a dry run on, okay, this is the data. If it crashes, here's what happens. Here's the process we go through to bring it back, and then have them show you that they can do it. That way, you actually are seeing for yourself that yes, my IT provider they have their stuff together and they know what they're doing. Because yes, it does happen sometimes. People will offer and provide backups, but they don't really think through some of the implications of different types of software and how those types of software can interact with one another or really just not work with one another. So having them actually show you that they can restore it, that's a key way to make sure that it is working.
Well, and I had a question on that same line. Let's say I'm just a one show and I want to keep my data backed up. Is it good, Sam, to have a redundancy plan in place? Not only have either a external hard drive, but it does a backup for you, but also maybe have it set up as in the cloud too. And the reason I'm asking that is, let's say that you have a flood or a hurricane that comes through and it takes out everything in your office that includes that external drive that you had it on. Having it in a cloud-based, would that there be an advantage for that?
Well, I do think I'm a believer in you can't back up too much. So, I would, and the way I actually handled some of the backup stuff that had to be done that I've handled in the past is not only did I have backups that were cloud-based, but also had backups that were on hard drives, and not just at the facility, but also at either in a safe deposit box or in storage in another place, to make sure that yes, I do have what I need to get things back up and going. And the hardest part of that, I think, is remembering to make sure you keep it up to date. A lot of people start with backups, but they don't consistently do them. You really need to schedule a time that, okay, I'm going to back up, and this is how I'm going to do it, and this is how I'm going to make sure that I don't run into challenges with that.
Okay, a couple more questions. Hey, you all were asking questions. I had a whole list for Sam, but here you go. Are there any guides for a small business as to how much time to allot to building a continuity plan, say X% of time each month?
I don't know of any guides, but just from experience, from some of the work I've done with some businesses, I would think that building depends upon obviously the size of the business. A small business, I consider a small business anything less than 100 people, 100 employees. I mean, I think that some people consider it less than 500, but I would think that spending 8 hours a month until you get it done. If you can afford to spend more, I would encourage you to do that. I think the quicker you get it done, and then you can start testing it. And as you test it, you can refine it. I'm of the opinion that once you get it in place, you still need to continue to spend that time on it every month to make sure that you are up to date, to make sure that you don't have resources identified that are no longer available. Say a key individual who's able to do something within your facility, they retire, and you forgot to go back and take them off the list. So now you don't have a resource identified for that. Those are some important things that you need to think about. And I would spend the time on it. It's well worth the time.
Okay. L. Rogers asked, will you say more about how far you want to go to do a dry run plan with an external customer, supplier, and so forth? For example, establish a plan in a memo. How do you suggest that dry run be held? I guess Sam is the question.
Well, what I would suggest is, I'm a huge fan of trying to do things face to face. If you can do it directly with that partner, that customer, that whoever it is, that supplier, then you're going to be better off doing it face to face. I think yeah, you can set things up in writing, but until you actually go through and you exercise it, you're not going to know for sure whether it's going to work. And it's always good to have gone through the process and know, okay, and then you'll still probably have some challenges that you face that you did not anticipate, because that's the way disasters and emergencies work. But at least you've done everything you can to try to make sure that you're set up and you're able to help and to deal with the customers. You're set up with your suppliers. You're set up with all of those who are relying on you and your business.
And I just wanted to follow on something you talked about as cash reserves. That is a critical component to businesses. I think many that have closed as a result of COVID, cash on hand was probably one of the reasons, let alone people not coming in, but being able to either make changes within, for example, if I'm a restaurant, I don't have the money on hand to put in a drive-through or to make those extra purchases for carry-out items. So, and another thing I've noticed for programs like PPP, it was shocking at how many businesses did not have all of their accounting and books up to date to be able to quickly respond to, here's the government wanting to help you, but you have to provide this information. And it was like, starting from the basics. And you never know when a disaster is going to happen. So that's why being prepared is critical to having, and that's part of this whole program is a resiliency plan, is how you need to be prepared. And I know Cindy's unmuted, so she must have something to add.
Well, a couple of things, to Sandy's point, you're exactly right. And we're still seeing that right now with the grants that are coming out. And I really, sometimes I kind of have to sit back and scratch my head when, I'm hearing either live from clients or on media, how businesses are struggling. Yet you'd be amazed if you're sitting in our shoes, how many grant funds are out there with pots of money still that they're trying to give away. And sometimes it's exactly what Sandy said. The businesses, they may not have filed their tax return for 2019, or, they've still got everything in a shoebox for 2020. And so, that's a very good point. That is a really big part of being prepared. The other thing, and Sam, you did an excellent job, but the other thing I wanted to mention, I spent a good chunk of my early career in manufacturing and mining, and then manufacturing a little later on. And, time is always money when it comes to manufacturing or, in mining. Of course, time was money because you were trying to mine that product, coal or whatever it was. And so you needed in inventory those items to make sure that you never had breakdowns in whatever that product was that you were producing. Later in my career in manufacturing, what I saw was that, there had been such a change that had occurred because of what I'm sure a lot of us have heard is, this lean approach to manufacturing. And, if you had any extra inventory, it was sinful. You didn't want to have that at all because, it was this just-in-time system. And I really think it's going to be interesting to see how philosophy changes after this pandemic because, I think that is one thing that we've seen in manufacturing in some senses is that, the supply chain got shut down. The manufacturer didn't have any extra, widgets that they needed to finish orders. And so I think it's going to be really critical going forward, particularly as, I think manufacturing is going to continue to be moved back to the US, that you really understand your customers and what they buy from you, what they're ordering, what their lot sizes are, and looking at those minimum order quantities. Because in that lean system, I'm telling you, that minimum order quantity might have been 1 or 2 pieces, and that was it. And that really didn't help you very much. So I think that's a part of this whole resiliency plan too, because, regardless of what the philosophy is, as a business owner, you need to keep your people employed. You need to keep the bills paid and cash coming in for yourself. I mean, you don't run a business to make no money, or not to make any money. But, so I think that that's important to really look at that whole inventory piece as well in all of this. And that, that's obviously kind of on a higher level, talking about, manufacturers. That's more medium-sized businesses. But I think it applies also to even retailers, because they need to know who their customers are, what their customers like to buy, and making sure that they're staying in connection with those customers to know how much of that product that they're going to need going down the line, making sure that they have that. Because you're right, if a customer's looking for something and they can't find it at your place, guess what? They're probably going to turn to Amazon to order it. So
communication with customers during a disaster is really important. That's why, early on in your comments, Sam, why you were saying you need to have that backed up to know how to contact your customers. Because I think if they know that you're trying to get that product out or to get back up and running, I think they will wait unless it's something they have to have yesterday. And then regarding your transportation logistics comments, I will say for those that are still with us, that don't forget next week, that will be our topic, is transportation and logistics, and it will be presented by Ryan Barnes with Brave Freight company. So I hope you will make plans to join us. Sam, again, great job. Thanks for sharing your expertise. I don't know where you're getting all this from, but you're doing a fantastic job somewhere on the road, if it's just where you're stopping in traffic on 81 and you're putting this together. But I will share Sam's slide deck with everyone and a link to see the presentation at your convenience. Or, as I say each week, please share this content with others, businesses, allies, customers that that could benefit from it. That's why we're doing that. And I just see one question. Oh, no, that was just a thank you for answering the question. But thanks, everybody, for joining us, and hope to see you next week, and have a great rest of the week. Thanks, Sam. Thanks, partners. Bye-bye.